Isolated from his own kind, a bobcat kitten named Osito found a family where he never should have, among 3 massive German shepherds. In that bustling, dog-filled home, he shocked everyone by choosing the big shepherds as his pack. Instead of growing up wild and wary, the little survivor bonded completely with the dogs. He followed them everywhere, copied their behavior, tried to imitate their playbows, patted after them with clumsy confidence, and curled up against their legs as if he had always been one of the dogs. Everyone feared that his gentle, dog-raised heart would get him killed the moment he returned to the wild. But years after his release, a trail camera deep in the woods captured an image that left everyone stunned. Can an animal broken by love ever truly go home? Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The California sun beat down on the Sacramento Valley with a relentless, bleaching intensity. The kind of heat that turned the tall, dry grass into tinder and made the air shimmer above the asphalt. It was early May, usually a time of vibrant renewal, but under the crawl space of an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of the city, silence reigned where there should have been the mewling of new life. A litter of bobcat kittens had been born there 3 days prior. Nature, in its infinite beauty, is also possessed of an infinite cruelty. The mother, likely struck by a car on the nearby highway or fallen victim to a coyote, had not returned. Hunger and dehydration act quickly on neonates. By the time a property surveyor stumbled upon the den, guided by a faint, raspy sound that was barely a cry, the tragedy was mostly complete. There were 4 kittens in the dust and shadows. 3 were still, their small, spotted bodies already cold, surrendering to the harsh reality of the wild before their eyes had even opened. But one remained. He was a scrap of tawny fur, smaller than a man's hand, crawling blindly over his siblings, his voice reduced to a desperate, dry squeak. He was fighting a battle he had no business winning, fueled by an instinctual drive that defied his grim statistics. This survivor was rushed to the Front Street Wildlife Rescue. The intake room was a flurry of controlled chaos, the smell of antiseptic and wet fur hanging in the air. The veterinary technicians, seasoned professionals who had seen everything from hit-by-car raccoons to poisoned hawks, fell silent as the cardboard box was opened. "He's severely dehydrated," the vet murmured, lifting the kitten. The skin tented slowly on the back of his neck. He was limp, his breathing shallow. "Give me fluids sub-Q, warm him up. We need to get his temperature stable before we even think about formula." In the corner of the room stood Haley, a volunteer with a reputation for taking on the cases that kept others awake at night. She was a woman of quiet strength, with laugh lines around her eyes and hands that were scarred from years of handling scared, sharp animals. She watched the tiny bobcat, his chest heaving with the effort of simply existing. "If he pulls through the night," Haley said, her voice steady, "I'll take him." The vet looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "Haley, he's a singleton. You know the protocol, singleton's imprint. Without siblings to wrestle and learn boundaries from, he's going to think he's human. He might never be releasable." "I know," Haley replied, watching the kitten's tiny, tufted ear twitch. "But let's worry about saving his life first. We can worry about his soul later." They named him Osito. The first week was a vigil. Osito lived in an incubator in Haley's living room, a quiet suburban sanctuary filled with the soft ticking of a clock and the gentle presence of her own animals. Haley slept on the couch, waking every 2 hours to the alarm. The feeding routine was a delicate dance of biology and patience. The formula had to be the exact temperature. The nipple had to be the right size to prevent aspiration. Osito was a fighter. He latched onto the bottle with a ferocity that surprised Haley, his tiny paws kneading the air, his ears wiggling with every swallow. Slowly, the hydration returned to his skin. His belly rounded out, full and warm. On the 10th day, the miracle happened. His eyes opened. They were blue at first, cloudy and unfocused, peering out at a world that consisted entirely of Haley's face and the soft fleece blankets of his enclosure. This was the danger zone for a rehabber. When those eyes cleared and turned to their adult amber, they needed to see a wild world, not a domestic one. But Osito was alone. He had no mother to hiss at intruders, no brothers to bite his ears. He only had Haley, and he had the dogs. Haley's home was the domain of 3 German shepherds, a pack of gentle giants who had seen dozens of foster squirrels, possums, and raccoons come and go. There was Sarge, the patriarch, a 12-year-old male with a graying muzzle and the patience of a saint. There was Bella, the motherly soul, and Bear, a massive, goofy 2-year-old who hadn't quite realized how big he was. Protocol dictated separation. A wild predator, even a kitten, should not interact with domestic pets. It creates a false sense of security. It blurs the lines. But Osito was failing to thrive emotionally. Despite the food, he was listless. He cried constantly, a high-pitched, lonely sound that echoed through the house. He needed a heartbeat. He needed a pack. One afternoon, exhaustion overtaking her, Haley sat on the floor with Osito in her lap. Sarge wandered over, his nails clicking on the hardwood. He lowered his massive head, sniffing the tiny spotted creature. Osito didn't hiss. He didn't spit. He reached up with a paw the size of a dime and batted at Sarge's wet nose. Sarge didn't flinch. He let out a soft, chuffing sound and licked the kitten's head with a tongue that covered Osito's entire face. Osito purred. It was a loud, rumbling engine sound that seemed too big for his body. He scrambled out of Haley's lap and buried himself in the thick fur of the German shepherd's neck. "Well," Haley whispered, watching the tension leave the kitten's body for the first time in weeks. "I guess that's that." As the weeks turned into months, the house in Sacramento became the stage for one of the most unusual natural experiments Haley had ever witnessed. Osito grew rapidly, his legs elongating, his paws becoming heavy and oversized, his signature bobbed tail twitching with excitement. But he didn't grow into a solitary, elusive hunter of the shadows. He grew into a German shepherd. Or at least, he thought he was one. The bond between the Bobcat and the dogs was absolute. In the mornings, when Haley opened the back door to the enclosed high-fenced yard, the dogs would thunder out. And right in the middle of them, running with a loping, distinctively feline gait, was Osito. He mimicked them. When Bear would drop into a play bow, front elbows on the grass, rear end in the air, tail wagging, Osito would stop, crouch low, and wiggle his rear end, attempting to replicate the gesture. He didn't have a long tail to wag, so his whole backside would shimmy. He learned to wrestle dog style. A bobcat's natural instinct is to grab with the front claws and rake with the back ones, a deadly maneuver for disemboweling prey. Yet, with the shepherds, Osito learned inhibition. He would wrap his paws around Sarge's snout, mouthing the dog's ears gently, keeping his razor-sharp claws sheathed. Sarge would groan comfortably, enduring the grooming, occasionally nudging the growing cat over with his nose to wash his belly. It was a beautiful, idyllic chaos. But for Haley, it was terrifying. She watched from the kitchen window as Osito chased a tennis ball. He didn't bring it back, of course. He wasn't a golden retriever. But he chased it, pouncing on it and batting it between his paws while Bear barked encouragement. "You're broken, my little friend," Haley murmured, sipping her coffee, a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "You love them too much. How am I ever going to put you back in the woods?" The criticism from the wildlife community was a quiet undercurrent she couldn't ignore. Habituation is a death sentence, the textbook said. A bobcat that approaches a hiker's dog in the wild is a bobcat that gets shot or euthanized. Haley knew the stakes. She knew that by saving his heart, she might have doomed his future. She tried to introduce wilder elements. She hid food in the brush of the enclosure to simulate hunting. She bought scent lures. She minimized her own contact with him, wearing a ghillie suit or remaining silent during feeding times. But the damage, it seemed, was done. As soon as the dogs were around, the wild predator vanished, replaced by the fourth member of the shepherd pack. By the time Osito was 5 months old, he was a stunning specimen. He weighed 20 pounds, all muscle and sinew, with distinct black spots and ear tufts that gave him a majestic, fierce appearance. But his personality was pure mush. He slept curled up between Sarge's front legs. He waited by the door when the dogs went out. He was, for all intents and purposes, a dog in a catsuit. Then came the phone call that changed the trajectory of everything. It was late August. The heat had broken slightly, giving way to the golden, dusty evenings of late summer. The intake coordinator from Front Street called Haley. "We have another one," the coordinator said. "Female. About the same age Osito was when you got him, maybe a bit older. 7 weeks. She was found in a barn in El Dorado. Terrified. She's hissing at everyone. We can't get her to eat." Haley hesitated. "I have Osito. He's a handful, and he's huge compared to a 7-week-old. "We know," the coordinator said, "but we're out of options. She's failing, Haley. She's shutting down from stress. We thought maybe seeing another bobcat would help." Haley looked at Osito, who was currently lying on his back on the rug, batting at Bear's tail. "Bring her over." When the carrier arrived, the difference between the two cats was stark. Osito was confident, sleek, and curious. The new kitten, whom they named Willow, was a ball of spitting fury. She was emaciated, covered in fleas, and terrified of her own shadow. When Haley opened the carrier in the quarantine room, a separate space from the dogs initially, Willow bolted to the highest shelf and huddled in the corner, shaking. For 3 days, Willow refused to come down. She hissed if Haley even looked at the door. She wouldn't eat the high-grade meat, wouldn't touch the formula. "She's going to starve herself," Haley whispered to Sarge, who was sniffing at the crack under the door. "She doesn't know she's safe." On the 4th day, Haley tried a desperate gamble. She trusted Osito. She trusted his temperament, molded by the gentle patience of the German shepherds. She opened the door to the quarantine room and let Osito in. The reaction was immediate. Willow let out a low, guttural growl, her ears pinned back flat against her skull. She was ready to fight to the death. Osito stopped. He looked up at the tiny, trembling creature on the shelf. He didn't puff up. He didn't growl. He simply sat down in the middle of the room and began to groom his paw. He ignored her hostility completely. It was a move straight out of Sarge's playbook. De-escalation through indifference. He sat there for an hour. Eventually, he stood up, stretched, and walked over to the bowl of food that Willow had ignored. He ate a few bites, chewing loudly, then chuffed, a specific soft sound bobcats make to one another. He backed away from the bowl and lay down, closing his eyes. It took another hour, but curiosity eventually overpowered fear. Willow crept down the shelving unit. She moved like liquid shadow, silent and tense. She approached the food, eyes locked on the large male. He didn't move. He kept his eyes closed, his breathing rhythmic. She ate. It was the first time in 4 days. The weeks that followed were the shock that the rescue staff had never anticipated. Everyone expected Osito, the dog-raised, confused bobcat, to be a poor mentor. They worried he would teach Willow to bark or chase balls. Instead, something ancient awoke in Osito's DNA. As Willow gained strength, she began to look to Osito for cues, and Osito, sensing the responsibility of the pack, shifted. He stopped playing quite so roughly with the dogs. When Willow was in the room, Osito became the teacher. He taught her how to stalk. In the large outdoor enclosure, Haley watched in amazement as Osito showed Willow how to move through the tall grass without making a sound. He would freeze, paw raised, waiting for a grasshopper or a beetle, demonstrating the patience he had never really needed to use before. When Willow rushed and missed, Osito would nudge her, chuffing, and reset the scenario. But the most incredible thing was how he taught her about the dogs. Willow was naturally terrified of the German shepherds. To a wild bobcat, a dog is a predator, a wolf, a killer. The first time she saw Bear through the glass door, she puffed up to twice her size and screamed. Osito intervened. He walked calmly to the door, rubbed his cheek against the glass, and then, when Haley opened it, he walked straight up to Bear and headbutted the dog's leg. He looked back at Willow, blinking slowly. See? Friend. He became the bridge between two worlds. He taught Willow that these specific dogs were safe, but he also respected her boundaries. He allowed her to be wilder than him. He encouraged her natural instincts. It was as if raising her reminded him of who he was supposed to be. The German shepherds, for their part, accepted Willow because she was Osito's puppy. They gave her space, sensing her fear, and allowed Osito to handle the introductions. Slowly, Willow learned to tolerate the dogs, then to respect them, and finally, to sit near them without fear. But she never bonded with them like Osito did. She remained a bobcat, aloof and watchful. And in teaching her, Osito began to drift away from the dogs. He spent less time curling up with Sarge and more time on the high platforms with Willow, grooming her, wrestling with her in the rough and tumble way of felids, communicating in a language of ear twitches and tail flicks that the dogs couldn't speak. Haley realized with a bittersweet pang that the student had become the master, and the master was finally growing up. Willow, the wilder one, had saved Osito from being too domestic. Osito, the gentle one, had saved Willow from being consumed by fear. The release date was set for October. Both cats were large, healthy, and hunting live prey. Rats and quail introduced into the enclosure with lethal efficiency. The location was a protected wildlife reserve in the foothills, miles away from human habitation, a place of oak woodlands and granite outcroppings. The morning of the release was crisp and cool. Loading them into the transport crates was difficult. Osito seemed to sense a change. He paced the enclosure, rubbing his head against the wire mesh where Sarge sat on the other side. Haley let the dogs out for one last goodbye. It wasn't standard protocol, but this wasn't a standard case. Sarge sniffed Osito through the wire. Osito pressed his face against the metal, chuffing softly. There was a silent understanding between the old dog and the young cat. The pack is breaking up. The drive was long and silent. Haley's heart felt heavy, a stone sitting in her chest. This was the price of admission for rescue work. You break your own heart to save theirs. When they arrived at the release site, the air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was a good place, a wild place. They carried the crates deep into the woods, away from the fire road. The plan was a soft release of sorts, opening the doors and letting them choose when to leave. Haley knelt beside Oseto's crate. "You be a good boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You stay away from houses. You stay away from dogs. You stick with Willow. She knows the way." She unlatched Willow's crate first. The female didn't hesitate. She shot out like a cannonball, sprinting 20 yards into the brush before stopping. She crouched behind a fallen log, her camouflage rendering her nearly invisible, waiting. Then Haley opened Oseto's door. He didn't run. He stepped out slowly, testing the ground with his large paws. He smelled the air, his nose twitching. He looked at the trees, the vast expanse of the sky. Then he turned around. He looked at Haley. He looked at the crate. For a heart-stopping moment, Haley thought he wouldn't go. She thought the dog in him was too strong, that he would try to jump back in the truck to go home to his warm bed and his German Shepherd brothers. He took a step toward her, and Haley had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. But then, from the brush, came a sound. A sharp, demanding chuff. It was Willow. She was calling him. Oseto's ears swiveled. He looked at Haley one last time, his amber eyes clear and intelligent. It was a look of gratitude, of recognition. "I love you," the look said, "but I am not a dog." He turned. His muscles bunched, and with a powerful push, he bounded toward the log. He joined Willow, and for a second, two silhouettes stood side by side in the dappled sunlight. Then they turned and melted into the forest. Two ghosts of the Sierra foothills, vanishing as if they had never been there. Haley drove home alone, the empty crates rattling in the back. The house felt quiet when she returned. Sarge met her at the door, sniffing her jeans intently. He smelled the pine and the forest, and the lingering scent of the cat he had helped raise. He let out a heavy sigh and leaned against Haley's leg. She buried her hands in his fur, tears finally flowing. But the story didn't end there. Months passed. Winter came and went, bringing rain to the thirsty valley. Haley continued her work, fostering squirrels and owls, but the Bobcat enclosure remained empty, a monument to the two who had left. One afternoon in early spring, Haley received an email from a wildlife biologist working in the reserve where Osito and Willow had been released. They had trail cameras set up to monitor the deer population. Subject: "You might want to see this." Haley clicked the attachment with trembling fingers. It was a grainy, black and white night photo. It showed a game trail deep in the woods. In the foreground, looking healthy and thick-coated, was a large male bobcat. There was no mistaking him. He had a specific notch in his left ear from a rough play session with Willow, and his size was imposing. It was Osito, but he wasn't alone. Trailing behind him was a smaller female, Willow, and stumbling along behind her, looking like fuzzy spotted potatoes, were 3 kittens. Haley stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. Osito hadn't just survived, he had thrived. He had become the alpha of his own territory. The cat who had grown up thinking he was a German shepherd, who had been bottle-fed and cuddled, had successfully reintegrated into the wild. He had mated with the orphan he had mentored. But there was a second photo attached. This one was taken during the day, near the edge of the reserve where a fire road cut through. A ranger's truck was parked in the distance. In the foreground of the photo, Oceto was sitting on a rock. He wasn't hiding. He was sitting tall and proud, watching the truck. His posture wasn't fearful. It was alert, curious, and confident. It was the posture of a creature who knew that not all humans were enemies. Haley printed the photos. She walked into the living room and sat down on the floor next to Sarge, who was napping in a sunbeam. "Look, old man," she whispered, holding the photo of the kittens in front of the dog's gray face. "You're a grandfather." Sarge sniffed the paper, then licked Haley's hand. The shock wasn't that a wild animal could be tamed. The shock was that kindness, learned in a living room in Sacramento between a species of predator and prey, could be strong enough to bridge the gap back to the wild. Oceto had taken the gentleness of the dogs and used it to save Willow, and through her, he had secured a future for his own line. Haley looked out the window at the oak trees swaying in the wind. She knew she would never see him again in the flesh, and that was exactly how it should be. He was out there, prowling the shadows, a king in his own domain, carrying a heart that had been shaped by the love of a dog. And somewhere in the dark woods, a bobcat father watched over his kittens, perhaps with a little more patience, a little more gentleness than the wild usually allows. It was a legacy of love, passed from human to dog to cat and back to the wild earth. And it was perfect. 5 years later, the story of Oceto and Willow became a local legend among the rescue community, a case study in the malleability of instinct and the power of surrogate parenting. But legends often fade, eclipsed by the immediate needs of the new intake animals arriving every spring. Haley had grown older. Her hair was more silver than brown now, and Sarge, her beloved patriarch, had passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years after Oceto's release. The house was quieter, though still filled with the bustle of foster care. One particularly harsh winter, a mudslide in the reserve forced many animals down from the higher elevations toward the suburban fringe. Residents reported sightings of deer, cougars, and bobcats near the property lines. Haley was sitting on her back porch, wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and bruised purple. The German shepherd she had now, a grandnephew of Sarge named Duke, lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked forward. He didn't bark. He just stared intently toward the tree line at the back of Haley's property. Haley followed his gaze. At first, she saw nothing but the deepening shadows of the oaks. Then, movement. A bobcat emerged from the brush. He was old now, his face graying, battle scars visible on his flanks. He moved with a slight stiffness in his hip. He was a warrior who had survived winters, droughts, and territory fights. It was Oceto. He sat down at the edge of the manicured lawn, about 50 feet away. He wasn't looking for food. He looked well-fed. He wasn't sick. He looked directly at Haley. Then he looked at Duke, the young German shepherd. Oceto let out a sound, not a growl, not a scream, but that familiar, low, chuffing sound. He dipped his head, a gesture that looked remarkably, impossibly like a playbow. Duke whined softly, his tail thumping once against the deck. Oceto held the gaze for a long moment. It was an acknowledgement, a check-in. I am still here. I remember." Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he stood up and turned back to the dark woods. But before he vanished, he paused. Two younger bobcats, sleek and strong, his offspring, or perhaps his grand offspring, stepped out of the brush to join him. They looked at the house with wild, suspicious eyes, nervous about the proximity to humans and dogs. Osito nudged them, a gentle, guiding shove toward the safety of the trees. He was teaching them, leading them, just as he had been taught. Haley watched until the shadows swallowed them whole. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a warmth that defied the winter chill. The little kitten who had been found dying under a porch, who had curled up in the paws of a German shepherd, had not just survived. He had built a dynasty. He had taken the second chance Haley gave him and turned it into a life full of purpose. She raised her teacup to the empty yard, to the ghost of Sarge, and to the wild spirit of the cat who remembered. "Good boy, Osito," she whispered. "Good boy." The wind rustled the oak leaves, sounding like applause, or perhaps like the distant, happy panting of a dog.